All right. Well, I see us in OBS. That's always a good sign. And
It's a good start.
it is a good start. And I love to say, I can actually say good morning. And you and I are in the same time zone. You and I are mere miles apart. We could
We
ride our bikes to each other at this point.
we could, and it's not even
It's
like eyebrow frosting temperature.
no. In fact, I shouldn't. Last week, I believe it was negative something when I was doing the show, and today it's 23 degrees in Forest
Oh,
Lake.
that's nice. You don't even need your
Balmy,
bogeys.
balmy weather for us in this part of the world. I'm sure my last week I had Glenn Vandenberg from Texas on, and he was snuggled up in his cardigan because it was in the 50s in Plano, and I'm like, that's
Hmm.
nice, and it was going to be 40 degrees warmer the next day, which it was. And joy of living in this frozen tundra. So
It's only frozen half the year. The other year, the
yeah,
other half the year, it's a swamp filled with parasitic vampires.
that's a great point. Yeah, and they will carry you off in small children if you're not careful.
It's a state bird, is the mosquito.
Yes,
In case
exactly,
people
exactly.
didn't know that outside of Minnesota.
Right. But see, the beauty of Minnesota is, and we are coming up on that wonderful month of March, where the temperature changes are extreme, would be the politest way to put it. So you get everything. You just have to wait around for a little while, and then hey, it's going to get colder, it's going to get hot, and yeah, yeah. See, my wife has the theory that if you live here, you can only complain about one season. So if you don't
Oh,
like summer, you can complain about summer. If you don't like winter, you can complain about winter, but you can't complain about both. I don't know.
I don't know about the theory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's questionable. I don't know where she is. She's hiding. I could query her and then she'd get mad at me, but we'll just let it go. It'll be fine. So, well, good morning. Oh, it's afternoon now. It's after literally afternoon. So, good afternoon, Heidi. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm having a wonderful day.
Excellent. Excellent. And I think it's Monday. Pretty sure it's Monday.
It is Monday, but it's also MLK.
It is.
So LaunchDarkly has the day off. This
You
is
know,
my
we do
only
too.
commitment.
And I kind of completely biffed on that. I wasn't thinking about that. And actually Beth, who does all our scheduling, she's like, I forgot that this was a holiday. I'm sorry. And I'm like, I'm sorry.
It's
I
all
don't know.
good.
It's all good. It's all good. I get a chance to hang out with you, so that makes me happy. So Heidi, for those of you who are unfamiliar with your background, how did you get to this weird place? We'll talk about Minnesota and cycling later, but tell me about how you got into this weird space known as computers and doing this extremely strange job we have of talking to other computer people for a living.
So, like a lot of people who went to college in the late 90s, I fell into it sideways through a series of accidents that were in no way like a tribute to me. And I'm sorry to everybody who came afterwards and had to do work to get into computers because we didn't. We didn't. If you could literally, what happened is I took a class at Hamlin University in hypertextuality. It was an English class. And we learned to write HTML so that we could make poems that interlinked with each other. And we had a class Moo.
Nice.
It was super cute. And so now I knew HTML. And then I got mono, which I don't recommend as a good time.
Mm-mm.
And I had to go back home for a while. And while I was recovering, a my sister's friend's dad had a startup, right? And needed somebody who knew how to make words happen on a web page using HTML. And in those days, that's all you needed to know. Can
Yes.
you FTP something to, we didn't even have the idea of production. It was just the
Right.
site.
Right.
There was no like staging possible. It was either live or it didn't exist.
Hmm.
And so I could do that. And I did that. And I came back to my elite liberal arts college with ivied walls and brick buildings, McAllister. And
Oh yeah.
I said to my English professor, you know how we have an English colon creative writing major? I want an English colon technical writing major, Professor Greenberg. And he looked at me and he said, I don't
What?
know, that seems so vocational. I'm like, vocational rhymes with paying my bills and all.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, he's Professor Greenberg should really be proud of what he did, because one of his other students this year won a bunch of science fiction awards. Ursula Vernon, who's been publishing for quite a while, published a couple books that won a Hugo and I forget what we're calling the YA novel award now. I'm like, good job, Professor Greenberg. Spite is the motivation that you have given the world. So I graduated from college with a technical writing degree that Macalester had never granted before, that I had patched together from like 3 other schools. And I had an internship. And it was sort of, I won't say easy from there, because like there was the 2001 was not a great year to be really like trying to take your career off.
Yeah.
I worked for a startup that had a standee of Austin Powers. So when you walked in, you opened the door to walk into their office, you would get, "Hey, baby." I'm like, oh, that's not what I was led to expect about interviewing. My suit feels awkward now. I'm interviewing with somebody who's wearing cargo shorts. Okay, startups. And I learned extreme programming, and I learned which is like, for those of you who were not there in those dark times, before we had Agile, we had extreme programming. And we wrote user stories on 3x5 cards and argued about them as if they were a ticket. It was kind of awesome. I kind of miss it. But it turns out that user stories are not the only thing that goes into software. So I kept being a technical writer for decades and hopping from startup to startup. I spent some time at bigger companies. Dell kept acquiring the companies that I worked for. Like the 3rd time, it starts to feel like malice.
Right. Just leave me alone.
Right? I didn't sign up to work for you. I was working for this other company who you have just bought again.
See, then you got people going, hang on, let's hire Heidi, because then we'll get acquired. So that's my cash out. So bring her on board.
Exactly. And I got to work at big companies. I worked at Microsoft as a contractor on the BitLocker project when it was a tiny gleam in the eye of Redmond. And we had to explain to everybody how you could have a TPM chip that knew what the state of a computer was and why that mattered, which was like, as a writing assignment, was super cool. I got to do so many things. And then I went indie for a while. If any of you are thinking of going indie, please just hire somebody to make sure you pay your damn taxes.
Yes.
It's not that quarterly taxes thing. They're not kidding. No, they're not kidding.
It's not a suggestion.
Yeah. And then I decided to come back out of indie and work for somebody who would pay my taxes for me. I mean, it's still my money, but
right. But it removes that requirement from you.
Yeah. And I applied for a technical writing job at LaunchDarkly, and the hiring manager at the time, Adam Zimmon, looked at my resume and said, "Okay, you're an excellent technical writer, but have you considered developer advocacy?" And I was like, "What? I don't develop. I'm not a coder. I don't code. I can write old-fashioned HTML." You know, the kind you can read. And he said, no, but look at these talks that you've been doing about technical writing, and look at these blog posts that you've been posting, and look at your deep understanding of a market sector. That's what we need for developer advocacy. And it turns out he was right. It turns out this is such a great job for me, because in the before times, it meant a lot of meeting people and connecting them with solutions. And now it involves like figuring out what people need to hear and broadcasting it, because I don't get to meet people as much. It makes most of DevRel pretty sad. They didn't hire us. Like, lots of us are introverts, but they didn't hire us for our ability to sit still in a small room and think in a concentrated way. That's the percentage of DevRel neurodiversity is even higher than your average tech cohort.
Fair point. Yeah, I don't miss being on airplanes. I don't miss crappy hotels. I do miss being around people, and I do miss that experience of being up in front of a crowd. It just isn't the same when you're staring at a screen for hours and hours and hours on end. But I don't know. I don't see that changing in the immediate future. I'm guardedly
No,
optimistic by spring.
SRECon. I'm co-chairing SRECon in San Francisco, and we're going live.
Okay. I mean, I
And
think it's possible.
yeah, like masks and vax. And we're discussing whether or not to do on-site rapid testing, but it's expensive.
Yeah.
But we're hoping by mid-March we'll be through this spike.
Right. It kind of feels like maybe April, maybe
Yeah,
things will get more normal. Maybe.
yeah. Um, so I've been my everybody has a nerdy pandemic obsession, like the part of the pandemic that they're willing to pay attention to.
Sure.
Mine is the wastewater treatment numbers
Yes.
because they are the most accurate way for us to know what the actual viral load in an area
Right.
is.
Right. Well, you think about how many people are doing like an at-home test that's not getting rolled into those official tallies that we see,
Right.
I can tell, and how many people aren't even bothering testing at all or can't get in to get tested even if they want to get tested. So, yeah, I think I saw some numbers earlier today, and I don't know the exact total for our home state here, but it is definitely over 1 million. And you start thinking, well, hang on a sec, we only have what, 5.5 million people in the state, so
Yeah.
we've all basically had it now. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, not me because I've stayed in.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's
So far, so
impressive.
good.
It's hard. I don't go anywhere either. I tested positive in September, and I have no idea how or why. But
You have teens?
good point. I do have a teenager, and I assume he was my vector since he was back in school full time. But I don't know that
Mm-hmm.
for a fact because he never tested positive.
Yeah.
So
Eh,
who knows?
we don't know. We don't know.
So I'm guardedly optimistic that April-ish maybe things get normal.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you're not, I guess, trying to play tennis in the Australian Open without being vaccinated.
I feel like a person could have been less of a jerk about that.
You think?
Yeah. I'm just like I I have evidently higher standards for sports figures than they have for themselves.
Mm, 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 mhm. See that one surprises me because you think about the way a lot of athletes are sort of judged in those kinds of sports, and it's on the majors. If you're a golfer, it's did you win the Masters, did you win the U.S.
Mhm.
Open? If you're a tennis player, did you win the Australian Open? You would think that you would check every single box, tick every single, dot all your T's and cross all your I's because you only have so many opportunities. You have 4 shots a year to win one of those kind of tournaments. You wouldn't want to be vaccinated to make that happen. I don't want to get on a vax rant here or anything, but
Yeah.
that one surprised me that he was unwilling to check that box. But
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting is high profile sports players are kind of like DevRel in that we are asking
interesting.
them to be good at something that isn't actually what they were trained to be good at.
Sure, sure.
We we expect college football players, like people who have just had their last game as a football player, to be able to string together a coherent narrative of the game as it was played in the moment, uh, while not hitting any of the points they're supposed to avoid because they have media coaches,
Right.
and hitting all of the points they're supposed to hit. And I'm like, if I'm that physically exhausted, I mostly just go bring food now. But it's sort of the same thing. It's like
Yeah.
you're never off camera.
Right. Right.
There's no time that somebody could be DevRel and be entirely off screen.
That's true.
Just like for high level athletes. Like if I were a complete asshole and somebody reported it online, I would take an enormous reputational hit.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. It is always something you got to be aware of, how we interact with folks anywhere. It isn't just when you're giving a talk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to remember that next time we actually get back in the real world.
Well, I just think it's interesting because some people don't feel as constrained about that, and we can tell because
Sure.
they've been harassing someone for years, and then we find out about it, and we're like, "Wow, I thought he was kind of nice. I'm
Yeah.
disappointed by that." And maybe that's how we feel about our athletes too. It's like I feel disillusioned.
Sure, sure. Well, I think that's why they avoid contentious topics and why most of us avoid contentious topics because I can't remember I think it was Michael Jordan who made that comment about, hey, Democrats and Republicans buy sneakers. So I'm
Yeah.
not going to try to alienate half my potential market by saying something, that way everybody can pretend that they're in my tribe and not somebody else's tribe.
Hmm. And yet, as the representative of a company whose reputation I care about, I also think it's important to say things like Black lives do matter. Maybe we should pull our media for the week and just focus on that. Like let's let's not be interjecting into people's timelines with software ads right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of our duties, especially if you're early enough in a company's life that you don't have media people.
Sure. Well, I think so much of this is trying to create a welcoming space. And I mean, I have never been a fan of the programmer kind of mentality. It's never appealed to me in any way, shape, or form. And I've always felt like software should be one of these spaces where it should more or less be a pure meritocracy. I mean, the compiler doesn't care about your gender or your anything really. Just did it work? Does it do what it needs to do? And I'm surprised, especially when you given our history of some of the very first computer programmers were women. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, how do we get a more diverse, world for our space? And I wish I had some answers to that. I wish I've strived any way I can to try to make things better, and I'm always looking for more opportunities to do that. But
Yeah, I think I think it has gotten better. Like it's not good. Don't get me wrong. It's not
mm,
good. It's like I would still worry about a young woman starting in computers, especially a woman of color. Um, but it's so much better than it was.
mm,
It's it's been a long time since anybody thought it was okay to show soft porn at a conference. It's been a long time since AWS allowed people to have booth babes. Like I
mm,
was just at reInvent, and you know who's staffing the booth at reInvent is technologists who can answer
right,
questions. And that
right,
wasn't always the case.
true.
So I can see our trajectory, and as long as we keep grinding, I think we'll get somewhere.
Did you ever feel like steered at all in your career? Because I know women I used to work with. I feel like she was sort of pressured into being more of like a project manager,
Oh
and she
yeah,
just really wanted to be a programmer, and so she became a project manager basically to advance, and then eventually she finally wrestled her way back into doing what she really loved, which was development. You ever feel that pull push?
absolutely. And tech writing is frequently sort of pink collar coded. And
Mm-hmm.
I was painfully aware of that. I don't find code that interesting. I find the charity majors calls it the socio-technical systems. I find the socio-technical systems of technology as interesting. I
Sure.
I don't I admire the people who find the nitty-gritty interesting. I'm not one of them. I'm like, how's the business working? What's the emergent property of what we're doing here? What's the long-term plan? That's the stuff I find interesting. And it's interesting because it is female coded up to a certain point. It's sort of like librarianship. When you think of a
Right.
librarian, you probably think of a middle-aged white woman.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the leadership levels of librarianship, it's dudes. So
Mm.
there's like a glass ceiling of point where you can't advance or it's very difficult. And so when I say that I have been nudged or led, it has worked well with my inclinations. But if I were a super codey person, I think I would be a lot more frustrated.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, I don't think we're going to solve that today, unfortunately. I
No,
wish, but
I will say that we talk so much about mentorship for younger developers and
mhm.
younger people. The thing that matters more is sponsorship. And that is mentioning people's names when they're not there, making sure that they get assignments, not just making sure that they feel okay in how they're working, but that they get hard stuff,
Sure.
that they get name making projects. And you don't even have to talk to somebody to sponsor them. You just
Hmm.
have to put their work forward.
Oh yeah, that's a
So
great point.
that's sort of the call to action I have for people who have any seniority, is to say, like, look around and see who you're assuming should do a job.
Sure, sure. And don't be afraid to recommend someone who we wouldn't maybe traditionally put into that spot. So that is an excellent point, that so often there is some of that unconscious, well, yeah, this is a really hard project, so give it to so and so. And like, well, but what about this person?
Yeah,
And we've all had that experience at some point where, was I even in the conversation for that? No, no, you weren't. And it's like, oh, well, why not? And
because he did the hard thing last time. Well, okay, great. Now he knows how to do the hard thing. He can be the 10% resource.
right, right. Pair
And if
with
he
the person where
leaves,
necessary.
right?
Hmm.
And if he leaves, we're not completely screwed. I
Hmm.
think one of the easy ways for me to sell cross training is to say, everybody leaves the company.
It's a great point.
Like, if
Single
you look at
person
the average
dependencies are not
tenure,
good.
yeah, if you look at the average tenure of somebody at a tech company, you need to suck everything they know out of them as fast as possible
Yeah,
and distribute
yeah,
it to your up and coming class.
it's a great point. Well, and I think too, we were talking about this in the pre-show. I don't think enough developers appreciate how important it is to be able to write prose and write for humans. And I'm a huge advocate for code should be written for humans, and the compiler is an ancillary consumer of that documentation. But I don't know why we seem to continually try to solve people problems with technology when the answer is just put a couple paragraphs down and explain what this does to another developer. And I don't, why do you think developers are so resistant to documentation?
So I'm on a team that wrote a book about this, not about why they're resistant, but about how to do it, called Docs for Developers. Go look it up. We have adorable corgis. I think the reason that people are resistant is partially because we're asking them to do something they're bad at. And
Sure.
humans inherently avoid things that they know they can't do well. So one of the things is, like, we're really asking people to step out of their comfort zone and talk about how other people would use this. It requires a lot of mental effort. They have to figure out who they're talking to. They have to take this elaborate mental picture of the architecture that they have and beam it onto the page somehow, and it turns out that is not the easiest problem we have.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
And they have to then be answerable for the results, because once you've written something and people don't understand it, they'll come back to you and they
Right.
say, I don't get this. So the resistance to writing that stuff is because it's so intimidating.
Sure.
It's exactly because they know it's powerful.
When there's nothing quite as terrifying as the blank editor screen, whether that's code or prose, doesn't or a slide deck, right? Nothing quite as intimidating as, oh my god, it's there's no pixels here. What do I do?
Yeah, that's actually one of the phrases in my book, is like, when you gaze into the blank page, it gazes back into you.
Yes.
It's the abyss is real. One of the things that we suggest is that you look at what documentation you have and extrapolate a template from it, sort of like any, Terraform, like anything you do in code, there is a template for how this should work. It's unique to your needs, but you can get a lot of it from Stack Overflow and then paste in the parts that are you.
Right.
In the same way, you don't have to write documentation starting with in the beginning. You can write documentation starting with, like, I woke up at 2 a.m. and here's what I did to fix this problem. Okay, well, later that week, how did you get to that problem? Okay, add that on. And it can be additive. And I like to suggest that people don't even have to write. There are lots of uh, I use Descript software when I'm doing recordings, and it does an automatic transcription. So you almost certainly on any smartphone have a tool that can do automated transcription, and you can
Sure.
just say your ideas, and then
Yeah.
you have it like 80% written.
Right. Well, I think the challenge is just starting, and I think we're so concerned about getting it right or getting it perfect as soon as we start touching the keyboard. Just go, just splat it out there and see what happens. And having written a few books and having a lot of friends have written books, there's a lot of different approaches to that. And I know some people are very much, no, I want my prose to be like perfect. And I have another friend who does the total opposite. He just basically sits down and just to use the most vulgar phrase, sort of vomits out the book. Just get it out there, get it, and he knows it's terrible, but he gets out 80% of it, and then he edits like crazy, and he's just brutal going through there, hacking away. But that's his process, and I think most of us would be better off just go ahead and throw some stuff out there and see what happens. And it can always be fixed. That's the beauty of prose, right? It's super easy to refactor.
Yeah, you're very likely not going to print, so you're going to be able to make it better. I think that the other thing is it's really awkward to try and figure out what it is you're supposed to be doing if you don't have any idea where to start.
Sure.
Like what, and people don't think about the fact that they've been reading this for their whole careers. If I ask you to write a bug report, you might lock up a little bit, but you have read literally thousands of bug reports. You know how they work.
Yes.
They're like, what was the problem? How was it solved? Or how was it not solved? When does it appear? It's a predictable format of writing. I think the other problem we have getting people to write is that they're not rewarded for it. I did a
Excellent point.
talk in 2018 and it was a one-off, but it's pinned to the top of my Twitter feed right now because I just can't give it up. It's about dog training because the best management book I have ever read is The Power of Positive Dog Training. And it talks about, I know, it's hilarious. It talks about how if you want a dog to do something, the dog needs to be clear on what you want, and it has to
Sure.
have a reason for doing the thing that you want.
Sure.
And we're frequently missing both of those, not just one of them. The dog doesn't, like the developer doesn't know exactly what you want, so they don't know how
Right.
they're going to get it right. And they know that they will not be rewarded for writing this. It's just work, and someone will ask why they weren't working on a feature.
Hmm. I've seen that. One of the more, I guess, depressing things I ran into earlier in my career. I had this young developer came to me one day and said, Nate, I'm trying to do it the right way. I get a bug, I go in, I write some tests, I leave the code better than when I found it. I'm doing the refactoring work that we're supposed to be doing, and it takes me a couple days, but and then I have a one-on-one with my manager, and my manager's like, "Hey, how come it's taking you so long to do this? When I give it to the senior guy, he's done in 2 hours." And this young developer is like, yeah, but the senior guy is making it worse. He's just going in, slap, 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 and half the time it doesn't fix the bug, half the time it creates more bugs. But in the manager's mind, well, he did it in 2 hours, you did it in 2 days, ergo you're not doing it as good as this other person. And so he was like, kind of like just despondent, like, what am I supposed to do about this? you know
And it's not even really the manager's fault because the manager has to have room to push back and say the thing we're prioritizing is maintainability over speed. Or the manager needs to say speed is more important than maintainability to the junior developer and say, look,
mm,
I, I'm glad you know how to do it right. That is not valued here.
sure. And now in that person's defense, he ended up leaving to go somewhere else, and I totally
Yeah,
understand why he did. But that's a good point, because there may be times where we decide, actually, no, we want speed here because we need to get into this market segment and we need to be there in the next 2 months, or that game is over for us. That was not the case in this particular instance. I think this was just a manager who was purely valuing speed over all else. Or, I'm sure there was some API they were responding to or something around, ooh, how quickly can you close a bug and how many bugs did you close this month, or some other silly thing. But be careful what you measure, I guess.
yeah.
Um,
You will become
but
what you measure inevitably.
uh-huh, uh-huh. But yeah, I think that's part of the challenge, right? Is making sure people understand the value of it and that they are rewarded for it, even if it's more of the add a person kind of reward instead of direct monetary kind of thing. And because I've seen that too, where I had another developer who was helping us with a bunch of architecture stuff, and his manager was like, "What are you doing all this crap for? I don't want you creating all these documents." And it's like, Yeah, I know you don't, but we do. So take it up with my boss.
That's the interesting thing about technical debt. People talk about it as if it were a universal bad, and it's not.
Mm,
It's like student loan debt. You take it
right,
on to build something knowing that it's going to cost you to pay it off later. That doesn't mean that it's bad debt.
right.
It's debt that you hopefully mindfully decided to incur.
Hopefully. And that you have a plan to pay it off at some point, as
Right.
opposed to just tacking more on the end.
Yeah. But
That's the hard
but
part.
I think it's a solid analogy in that way is that sometimes people, you know, in their software graduate from undergrad and look at their technical debt and think, grad school,
Mm, mm,
rather
yes.
than now I need to go find an industry job and grind away at this.
Hmm. Well, and that's an interesting point too, because I think about how we teach this at a undergraduate level, at a boot camp level, even at the graduate school level. None of those projects lasts very long. And then you get into the real world and projects don't ever end. There is no end finish date. I think it's taken our industry most of my career to get out of this mindset of project and more into product, which is good because, I remember when someone told me, oh yeah, software spends most of its time in the maintenance phase. And it's like, so it's just a product then that we continue to invest in until we decide it's no longer worth making that investment. It's definitely a bit of a switch. But we don't teach people how to handle that. We don't, everything we do in a boot camp undergrad is all, you know,
Greenfield.
greenfield, and you never have to deal with heritage code. And then you get in the real world, it's like greenfield. Oh, that's crazy. We don't do that.
Yeah. Allow us to introduce you to our SAP instance. And the thing is, we send people out of these code schools thinking that heritage is inherently sort of bad, ugly, messy, and should be
Right.
refactored. We don't send them in saying, this company is making billions of dollars with this Excel spreadsheet. Don't touch
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm. Do not
and
break it.
and the new people come in with all sorts of hubris. It's not wrong of them to feel that way. That's definitely what they were taught. But uh, if I had anything to say to somebody coming into a terrible, messy, debt laden, they're using a what to do what kind of situation, it's like they're making money. They're making enough
Mm-hmm.
money to have hired you. There is something valuable about this big ball of mud.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why I try to use the word heritage just to remind people that it isn't always a negative, that we are in many cases, to your point, making billions on this system. And if you've got software that has continued to be valuable for 5 years, 10 years, you should kind of pat yourself on the back for that. That's pretty cool. Are there some issues in there? Well, undoubtedly. But that doesn't mean the developers who came before you were morons and should all be burned in effigy. They had decisions they had to make, often under tight time constraints with insufficient information. And guess what? We're going to curse some of your code someday too. That is one of the most humbling things as a developer, I think, when you're reading some code and in your back of your head you're like, what idiot wrote this?
Oh,
And then it dawns on you that you wrote it like 2 years ago, and it's like, oh yeah, yeah, I guess I've written some pretty crappy code in my life. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that one of the interesting things to me when people come in is, can they come in with both enthusiasm and humility?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great phrase, the humility. I wish more developers had more of that. That seems to be in short supply.
We don't really encourage it.
No, no, we don't. Some of that I think is sort of the hero complex that we seem to really put up on a pedestal. The person who rushes into the burning building and saves the day at 3 in the morning by fixing that thing, and we hold them up, and sometimes we ignore that they're often the ones that start the fires too.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't spend as much time talking about the sysadmin who patched that last week, whatever. Like that
Hmm.
was just Tuesday for them. And
It was a non-issue because they had the
yeah.
right process in place to solve that problem, and
Hmm.
yeah, you didn't even get affected by it. You didn't even know it was a problem.
Yeah, and we don't reward excellent maintenance the way we reward heroism.
Hmm. Hmm. One of my favorite slides is my old boss Andrew Clay Schaefer standing in front of one of his slides, that says, "Good job updating servers this year," said no CEO ever, or something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. And I love throwing that out there because it's critical work. And it's kind of like, so I was an offensive lineman in football, and my job was one of those that if you didn't know football, didn't know how line play worked, nobody knew what we were doing unless we screwed up. If we screwed up,
Right.
everybody
If you
knows
screwed
that we.
up, the quarterback
Yep.
got sacked, and then
Yep.
everybody had a question, a
Exactly.
lot of questions,
Exactly.
angry
Yep.
questions.
Yeah.
But
See,
most of the time, you're just standing there up against some other big guy.
yep.
Nobody
Doing
cares.
my job. Yep. And nobody notices when you do your job. And my son is a keeper in soccer, and same problem. Nobody notices when he makes a save. Nobody, well, he's just doing his job. But you let one in, and you're a bum. And it's like, okay, maybe we need a little more appreciation for blocking and tackling and things of that nature, and being in the right positioning and whatnot. But yeah, that's another interesting challenge I think we face as an industry, because we do reward the features and functionality, and we tend to gloss over the work of making sure that we have a robust infrastructure on which to deploy these things. Without that, the rest of it wouldn't work so great, would it?
Yeah. And I'm enjoying the rise in sort of the valorization of SRE,
Mm-hmm.
but SRE is also really specific to a segment of companies that is not all companies. A lot of companies and organizations still have sysadmins. Whether or not they say sysadmins, they still have
Sure.
sysadmins who are not doing SRE work. They're not in the cloud, or if they're in the cloud, they're administering virtual machines and not like cloud workshop stuff.
How do you react? I've had some people challenge me with, like, well, SRE is just DevOps, or it's just a reimagining of DevOps.
Yes and no. I think SRE is specific to scale problems at, I hate to call it web scale, but say web scale.
Sure.
DevOps is where you start, and a DevOps transformation can happen at a company of any size. But SRE is specific to what do we do with those trillions of messages?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a different problem because the optimizations that make a difference for DevOps are very different than the optimizations that make a difference at the SRE level. Like DevOps, it's not worth spending your time for 100 milliseconds because you're not dealing with that kind of volume. In SRE, 100 milliseconds is
Huge.
astonishingly important. 10 milliseconds is astonishingly important because of the volume.
Mm-hmm.
So there are SRE things that are impractical and unuseful if you're still trying to do DevOps. So I don't want people to think that SRE is advanced DevOps. It's
Sure.
not. It's just on a different path.
Well, and I think it also focuses more on eliminating the toil, to use the phrase, and really embracing the automation. Because when I look at these distributed architectures that we're attempting to build now, they require that level of automation. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when your build process was right click in the IDE and you drag it over to a magic file location, and then some cron job picks it up and, moves it. And 2 hours later, maybe your thing's running, but it probably involved, Simon going in and doing something by hand after you called him, because to call Simon when it doesn't work. And that's okay if I'm only deploying occasionally. But if I've got thousands of services that are redeploying constantly throughout the day, I can't call Simon to solve that problem. It needs to be automated at a level that we didn't need 20 years ago. So to me, I think that's another central tenet of that, is you got to have that automation in place. You got to have people who know how to do that. It isn't just fill out tickets for the developers so they don't have to. My soapbox back under my desk here.
I was
Get
just,
off my lawn.
yeah, I'm thinking about the idea of continuous integration, continuous
Mm-hmm.
delivery. At LaunchDarkly, we talk a lot about progressive delivery, where we're making sure. Actually, let me back up. I think there is an important distinction between deployment and release.
Yep.
Deployment is getting your stuff out to the place it needs to be. Release is when you show it to the people who need to see it. And all of the CI/CD stuff feeds into getting stuff where it needs to be, feeds into deployment. But then you have to think more holistically about who you're going to release it to and when.
Yeah.
Because I really hate it when my apps change. I have a lot of feelings about every time somebody changes my software. And in other like situations, you have to retrain people. Like every time Microsoft Word changes, the US Army spends something like $6 million retraining people.
Hmm.
So actually rapid changes on the user end may be counterproductive, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't be deploying them all the time and checking them and making them ready so that at that quarterly moment you get the big bang.
Yeah. But it isn't a big bang in terms of delivery because you
Right.
did that incrementally. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that makes me think of feature toggles, and I love your thoughts on feature toggles since that seems to fall very neatly into that category. I think that's kind of an underutilized technique, frankly. Although it can cause some pain, see Night Capital, but hey, what could possibly go wrong?
So Knight Capital committed the classic error in that they reused a toggle.
Off by
This
one
was
error too, as well. The oops, seven
yeah,
servers got updated.
yeah. So like the Knight Capital story, if you don't know it, go look it up or we'll put in a link because it's horrifying. And also, I work for a feature flag company where this is like our anti North Star. Like, let's never do this to people.
Don't
Let's
ever do this.
make it impossible to do this. But the problem is when they had a problem, they couldn't just reverse it.
Right.
They had to redeploy and they redeployed the wrong image.
Mm.
And that moment of panic when you're not thinking clearly, when you're doing millions of dollars of trades in a minute and it's the wrong trades, holy shit, it's
Mm.
not really a good time for you to be thinking. We're not
No,
panic and rational thought are not well aligned in our
no.
brains. So I love like the most powerful thing about feature toggles in deployment to me is the kill switch. It's like, oh shit, turn it off, turn it off, turn it off. I I don't know what went wrong. Something went wrong. I want to be able to turn it off without doing a redeploy, without
Yeah.
touching anything else. I need that thing to stop happening. And that moment is so powerful. This is the thing. A lot of people think of feature flags or feature toggles as sort of a front end thing where you're like, is it blue or is it green? Are
Right.
we doing A/B testing?
Can you see
I
this or not? Yeah.
yeah, I think of it as a really powerful admin thing to say like this feature is broken and it needs to stop
Right.
happening all over the world right now.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think one of the issues I've seen throughout my career is a lot of companies will have these very, I'll say, ornate software development lifecycle approaches with lots of gates and lots of templates and, different meetings and review boards and tickets and whatnot. And I understand why that exists, right? I mean, we had a bad thing happen. Let's make sure the bad thing never happens again. But most companies, at least that I've been a part of, don't have any thought around what happens if the bad thing does happen. How do
Right.
we stop that? How do we solve that? How do we redeploy if something goes wrong? And it's like, oh well, it won't happen because bad things can happen. Yeah, no, they can. They really can.
They can, and they will in fact be worse because the change management board has approved it and so you don't have a backup plan.
Right.
And so I really love having anytime somebody's releasing something, having a way to smash the oh no button and stop it. And being able to do that on a granular level is really exciting because a lot of times we think of as a release as being a big wad of all the things that we have glued together. But what it actually is a bunch of small features that we have glued together. And if we can control the features individually, then we have the ability to fall forward, to
Right.
say, okay, that one thing is not working. The other 8 things are working fine. Let's pull the one thing, 8 things go forward. We're going to be in better shape.
Well, and if you think about where we borrowed so many of our analogies from, I've never worked on an assembly line, but you keep hearing the phrase of "stop the line." That if
Mm-hmm.
if someone's arm gets caught, there isn't, oh well, that's too bad for Stevie. No, there's a way of shutting the whole thing down so that people don't get hurt. And software is kind of the same ballpark here. Lots of people can get hurt financially for sure, if we're not careful with what we do. So why don't we have more of the stop the line kinds of concepts baked into our code.
Yeah. I think it's it's because developers are so far away from their users. If you think about what it would take for a developer in your company to talk to a user or even to hear like a chorus call from a sales team, how many requests would they have to make? Because we end up counting on our product and project managers to do the audience survey, and then they filter it through the things that the company needs, and then the engineering manager says, okay, well, we have the time and capacity to do this, and by the time it gets to a developer, we we don't always know why we're doing it.
Right. Yeah, I certainly
And
remember early in my career, hey, can we go talk to the end users? Oh no, no, no. We don't want your kind talking to them. Like, in your kind. I showered this morning. I can speak with other human beings. I do it all day, every day.
my t-shirt doesn't even have any words on it, come on.
It's clean. My hoodie's clean. Come on. Yeah. It that attitude was definitely very pervasive early in my career of, oh no, no, you're not allowed to see the customers. And I remember the lengths I had to go to sit with one of our people and listen to them they were on a billing kind of call center kind of thing, and to be able to sit with them and listen and watch them use the system I worked on to try to get some sense of, oh, okay, well, we could probably improve that, couldn't we? And it's amazing to me how much positive can come out of those scenarios. I remember talking to one of my friends, and he said, yeah, I sat down with my customers, and the very first thing they did was change all the defaults. And I said, well, hang on. Or he said, like, isn't that the way you want it? And they're like, no, God, no, this is the exact opposite. He said, well, hold on a sec. And he went back to his desk, switched the defaults, redeployed, went back over there and said, hit refresh. The guy's like, oh my God, you can do that? Like, yeah. And I just thought, like, how did no one ever
Well, and
have that conversation?
I don't know what breaks. I worked for a while for a company that sat on top of the Medicare billing system
Okay.
and made it slightly more accessible because CMS is it's green screen, it thinks in mainframe, and they were like, okay, we can modernize this. And they put a pretty web front end on the API. They didn't talk to the people who were using it. The women in the back office of your doctor's like medical center are happy using the F keys. They are happy
Yeah.
with green screen. They are wicked fast. And if you make them use a mouse and pull things out of a menu, they are not happy. They are
Right.
angry because you have broken
Right.
their workflow. And I just wondered if anybody had, I don't know, watched our users before we came up with the idea for this product.
Often not. I think you're absolutely right. There's often a huge disconnect between what people need, and some of that's, I think, the way procurement works. The people who are
Mhm.
buying the product are often not the end user, and some of that's the bureaucracy that exists between that. But I've seen that countless times throughout my career, and I've sort of taken it upon my shoulders whenever I see someone interacting with bad software and it's taking 19 clicks to do something. I'm like, yeah, sorry, that's my fault. I mean, not me personally, but it's my fault, my industry's fault. And it
Yeah.
does boggle my mind how often you run into a scenario where it's like, yeah, this one simple thing takes us 19 clicks.
Hmm.
Why? Now my wife's a business analyst, and she'd say, because they didn't listen to the requirements that we wrote. Nobody read the requirements. It's like,
Possibly.
part of it too.
But as a developer, I've seldom seen business requirements.
Hmm.
I I see assignments,
Sure. Sure.
but the context is lost.
Hmm. Well, and sometimes so many of these things you don't understand the implications until the rubber meets the road, and I've experienced that where I get a card, a story, whatever you want to call it, and I start looking at it. I'm like, well, hang on here, product owner type person. This implies that A or B is going to happen. Which one do you want? And they're like, oh, I never thought of that. Okay, well, you kind of have to, because the computer can't just flip a coin. So you got to tell me, do you want it to do A or B? Yeah, and I do think that's one of the challenges we face and I think that's why so much of software devolves into spreadsheets and email, because that's what people use day in, day out. They're comfortable with it. Whether that's a good or a bad thing is neither here nor there.
It doesn't matter. It's what
No,
they're doing
it's
to
what.
to make the company work.
Yes, yes, and I shudder to even guess how many billions of dollars right now, as we speak, are flowing through an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the bright side, Excel is really stable
Oh, absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
it's
It's a well understood
really
programming API.
backupable,
Hmm.
unlike theoretically our infrastructure as code is, but there are not a lot of people who actually find that's true if they have a full outage.
Hmm. 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 Or
They're
how
like,
much of the world relies on, Amazon East.
that's just embarrassing.
It's fine.
It's fine. It's fine. It totally makes sense to run your error alerting through the system that might be down.
We'll do it live.
We'll do live in production. That's the other thing that I think is really interesting as a person who's like deep in the world of feature toggles and feature flags is the idea of test staging production is a hedge against not being able to react.
Hmm.
But if you can actually use production to do a tiny percentage rollout, or we have a food delivery company that rolls out to a city as a test.
Sure.
So the drivers, the kitchens, and the users are all on the new interface or whatever. Because you could test those in isolation, but you wouldn't know if they were working. So you have to test them all
Right.
together. But you only have to test them in one small city and watch it really carefully. And if that's okay, then you can feel better about rolling it out. But nobody's staging can replicate production. I ask
Right.
this all the time in talks. I'm like, how many of you can afford all of the licenses for staging that you have on production? Somebody once raised their hand and I asked where he worked and he said AWS. I'm like, you don't count. You don't count. The rest of us are like, well, yeah, this API call is failing, but that's because we don't have an SAP license for it, because that
Right.
would be really expensive. So in production, we think it'll work.
Hmm.
I don't love that as a way to treat staging. I'd rather get rid of staging and do the work in production where I'm
Sure.
getting an accurate report on what happens.
That's interesting because you talk about testing in production or monitor driven development or whatever phrasing you want to use. And part of me is like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense because my customers are testing in production right now.
We are all testing in production. Some of us
Yep.
admit it.
Yep. And then there's this other part of me that is deeply, deeply terrifying. And
Yeah.
I don't know how to like square that circle.
I don't think that either is irrational. I think that the terror is definitely related to times it has gone wrong in production
Hmm.
and it's been an emergency.
Yeah.
All we can do is make it less dangerous to test in production,
Right.
less existentially frightening. Like I've just pushed to every one of our users. No, I've just pushed to all of the users over 40 in Florida who speak Spanish.
Sure.
Okay, we're testing our localization to Spanish. It doesn't mean that all over the world everybody's getting the Spanish variant. It just
Right.
means this particular subset. And that is a much more, I think it's less terrifying.
Right.
I think that the terror relates to what percentage of your users will be affected if you screw up.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's to your point, we imprint on those negative experiences. If you've ever had
Mhm.
food poisoning, whatever food you connected to that, whether it was the cause or not, doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Your brain will basically never let you have that again in your life. And
Nope.
my wife, when she was pregnant with our son, for her it was Swiss chard. I don't know why exactly. I'm sure it had nothing to do with Swiss chard, but for
It doesn't matter. She's never eating it again. He's a
no,
freshman.
no. And
Nope.
there were several years where if Swiss chard showed up in the CSA box,
Mhm.
she would leave the kitchen and then I would dispose of the Swiss chard and then she could return to putting away the vegetables. Right?
Yeah.
But it
A-
was I think
And
she can
we
be in the room with them now, but to
but
the
we
best of
all
my
have
knowledge, she
these
still won't eat it.
aversions. These, like,
100%.
called on somebody paged us when we were a tiny sysadmin and said
Mhm.
your change has taken down Tokyo, like
Yes.
go fix it right now. And you're standing there at a nightclub going, yes
What?
sir.
I didn't know we had an office in Tokyo. Let
right?
me get on
But it
that.
turns out that we did, and the international date line and blah, blah,
Oh
blah.
God. Oh,
Booking
dates,
flights across
dates.
the international date line is my least favorite activity.
I think crossing the date line for me is the most painful travel experience, and also the weirdest one. I remember coming back from Australia and leaving Australia at like 9 a.m. and landing in LA at 6 a.m. the same day, and being kind of like, okay, all right, I just spent like 20 hours in a metal tube, and it's earlier than when I left. Yeah, this is fine. This is
Yeah.
fine. Yeah, that's one of the only ones that my body just taps out on. My
Mm-hmm.
brain, my body, just anytime I cross that, it's like, yeah, forget it. You're not going to sleep well for a couple of days. So good
Yep.
times. So
But yeah,
let me,
we do imprint on bad experiences,
yeah,
and that's why we're scared.
yeah,
It's not irrational. It's just old data.
yeah. I feel like we're making strides. You know, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that A/B testing was something that only Twitters and Googles and Amazons of the world did, and now that's becoming more common. You know, I think we're getting more nuanced, more mature in our approach to getting code to production. At least I want to believe that. I don't know. Maybe I'm being naive. I mean, every time I say that, then I go have a conversation with a client and I realize, oh, okay, all right, well, it's not evenly distributed then. Okay,
No,
okay.
it is not. And I find it fascinating. There's like the cool kids who
Mm-hmm.
are all headquartered in San Francisco. Not all, but and who are moving super fast at the very cutting edge of progressive delivery. And then there's tax preparing companies in the Midwest who legitimately cannot move that fast
Right,
and have to
right.
figure out what they're doing step by step because they have a lot of our money.
Well, and that's a very good point that I think gets lost sometimes in these conversations. A lot of us sort of have this, I guess, attitude of, well, if you're not doing it this way, you're doing it wrong. And that sort of failing to take into context matters. I got to tell you, I really hope that my bank and my 401k provider are real conservative with changes, especially to, like the data. Because that's my money, and I would rather you take an extra couple weeks, and I'm okay with that. And that's not the same as some startup trying to get angel funding or something, and that's okay. And not there should just like one size t-shirts doesn't work.
Yeah.
One size software is probably not a good idea either.
Yeah. It's really interesting for me being in Minnesota because the technologists I encounter are much more likely to work for a large organization.
Yeah.
Like I was in a church council meeting and I got myself in trouble because I attempted a very dumbed down explanation of my job because I'm sitting around with a bunch of, retired people. Yet two of them retired from Target IT and they were like,
Ah,
please don't talk down to us. I'm like, sorry,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
sorry. Yeah, but we have a lot of
We
technologists.
do.
They don't have a lot of incentive to do the new cool thing because it's not it's not something they need in order to get
Right.
things done.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Need factors into this. It's one of the conversations I've had a lot with my grad students about that. That if you are a major retailer like a Target, like a Dick's Sporting Goods, et cetera, you have a very different feeling about the whole holiday buying season than if you are, I don't know, a restaurant or an insurance company or something. Like that's a very different experience. And that's okay, and that you have to understand how those forces apply to your business. I mean, it's what we were talking about at the very beginning, right? Is a lot of developers do not understand how their company makes money and how they fit into that. I mean, I know that was, I think that was in the pre-show. We were chatting a bit about that with,
Yeah,
this idea of figure out how you fit into the value chain of your organization.
it makes it a lot easier to stay employed. If
Yes,
you
yes.
cannot articulate the value that you are adding to the company's bottom line, it's really hard to argue for keeping your job,
Yeah, yeah, agreed. I always kind of
which
wonder, like, so
doesn't seem like a problem right now, but I assure you, babies, it's coming. It's coming again.
well, it's funny you talked about that. I was when we were chatting about kind of your origin story a little bit, it reminded me of kind of these little ebbs and flows we inevitably see. I remember just through sheer luck of timing, right? I graduated into an incredibly strong job market where companies were basically like, "Oh my God, you have a degree in computer science, please, please, please come work for us." And I knew people who had been high, who came out of school just a few years ahead of me, completely different job market. A few years after me, completely different job market. And I mean, I lived through the we're outsourcing all of IT to foreign countries approach, and then some number of years later, oh wow, where did all our essentially mid-level developers, people we'd grow into architects go? Like, why don't we have are senior people and junior people? Yep, you hollowed us out for a decade. I wonder why. So these ebbs and flows happen, and you need to be at least mentally prepared for that. It's never going to be a permanent state. It'll always be changing. Yeah, you can always rest assured on that front, for better or worse. So I do want to talk about bikes because I
Yes.
know you and I are both cyclists, and we were chatting before. Now I did a couple metrics entries last year, and I was more than ready to be off my bike by the time that was over. And then you were talking about doing like full centuries, and I'm just like tip of the hat because that's a lot of time on the bike.
Well, I haven't made it yet. I get a
Okay,
tattoo when I finish my first full century, but uh, I have um, I have hypermobility, which means all of my joints are attached with loose rubber bands that have been left in the sun. And it turns out that leaning on a bike and sitting on a bike are ergonomically terrible for me. I cannot get past 60 miles.
okay,
Hard stop. No matter how good my fitness is, 60 miles, my elbows, my shoulders just give in.
sure.
I got myself at the start of the pandemic a recumbent trike, which one of my coworkers said was sort of like a lawn chair attached to some wheels. This is not untrue.
No, no,
No. Um, and it's slow. I've got 20-inch wheels. Like I can get faster, but I'm like 5 miles an hour slower than I am on my road bike.
right,
I had to stop and think about why I was cycling. Is it because I want to go someplace very fast?
right.
Or is it because I want to keep my body strong? Or is it because I enjoy getting my exercise outside? And once I reframed the problem space, it stopped being like, I'm too disabled and gimpy to be on a road bike for 60 miles and started
Right.
being, I can spend a full day and be able to walk afterwards
Yes.
if I use an adaptive device.
Yeah, so Java Grunt says what type of biking? For me, it's road cycling. I've never quite gotten my brain around like mountain biking. I keep thinking about getting a fat tire bike just because that's something that seems like it'd be a lot of fun this
It's
time of
very
year.
Minnesotan.
Yeah, yeah, very Minnesotan. But then I'm like, well, how many months would I would not want to ride that any other time of year because I'd feel so plotty. I'm already slow enough, and I've got a high-end road bike that way more machine than
Yeah.
I need or can use. But yeah, Java Grunt says physical plus mental health improve. Yeah, 100% agree. I very briefly did the whole running thing and never got that quote unquote runner's high. I've felt that on the bike for sure.
Yeah. And so the recumbent trike, I do a lot of trail riding.
Yeah.
The thing about it is it's really low. It's
Yes.
terrifyingly low. I am staring at people's hubcaps. Um, and I just I find it a little scary.
Hmm.
So mostly I load it up and I do trail riding, but because
Sure.
we're in Minnesota, like there's a trail that goes past White Bear Lake that's 50 miles. Hugo to not Hugo, not North Branch, way up there.
Yeah, it goes from Hugo all the way to North
Cambridge.
Branch. Hmm.
Yeah. Oh no, but you can go past North Branch.
Yeah, I
So
ride that
anyway,
trail all the time. I know exactly
yeah,
which one you're talking about.
yeah. So like a person could do a century just on that trail,
You could. Yep. Yeah,
and
it's not the most
it's
visually appealing trail we have in Minnesota.
no, it's not the most scenic. The Paul Bunyan Trail up north is gorgeous.
Yes. Yes. I've ridden that quite a few times from like Brainerd-ish up to like Nisswa. That's
Hmm.
beautiful and much more scenic than this one. It's not bad once you get north of Wyoming. I think it gets a little more attractive, my opinion,
Yeah.
but it is a little goofy. There's a couple spots where, let me just put it this way, the roads that cross that trail, a lot of those people, even though there's big flashing lights, they don't seem to interpret what that means for them,
No,
and
no.
yeah, that annoys me. I I keep going back and forth between whether I feel more comfortable on the road or on the trails. Because on the trails, every time I cross a road, I feel like I'm taking my life into my own hands. At
Hmm.
least if I'm on the road, I feel like I'm here and you kind of have to see me, sort of. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Trade-offs.
But I also do a lot of, when they're available, organized rides, because
Yes.
I love the feeling of like it's 7 in the morning and we're all going to set off together, and then the fast people will go fast and the families will go
Yeah.
slow, and
Yeah.
we'll all meet up at rest stops where there's music and fruit and lovely volunteers.
Hmm. Well, you and I both did the tour of the Saints last year, which is so
Hmm.
much fun. That's where I went to college, St. John, St. Ben's. And to your point, the very first restaurant is filled with donuts from the Cold Spring Bakery, which is one of the
So
all-time
tasty.
greats. So good. I wish they had some more of those later on, to be honest,
But
because
the orchard has such good fruit.
the orchard is very good as well. And I did not mind the rest stop off the trail where you could get your hands on like Snickers bars and things of that nature. That was kind of
Hmm.
cool. But oh yeah, Java Ground agrees on the volunteers, and Colorado agrees has amazing bike trails. Every time I'm in Colorado and I see these, I mean, I would call them highways for the love of all that is holy, and they go everywhere. And it seems like you could ride hundreds of miles without ever having to encounter a car. And every time I'm out there, I think I should get a bike and do that
Yeah,
on my
yeah.
list.
It's not so far you could drive.
It's true. That's true. Yeah, it is drivable, and it's I actually know a acquaintance, golf acquaintance of mine who has a house out there too, and they've gone out there
There you
for
go.
30 years. So maybe
Excuse
I'll
me,
have to.
I've come to
Hey,
join you for the
could I
beautiful
could I just crash at your
Coloradoans.
place for a couple days? Can I just leave a
Yeah,
bike in your garage?
I like Colorado scares me though, because being Midwesterners, we are not tuned in on the whole hill climbing thing. We are we are sad and weak. Even the San Franciscans are just like, what? No, I just went up Market Street. Why wouldn't you do that? I'm like, I
I'm a
could only
pixie.
barely walk up
Yeah,
Market Street.
yeah, yeah.
What are you
No, I,
talking
I
about?
agree. I did. Christina and I did a trip in kind of the well, like Pepin area, like you and I were talking in the
Hmm.
pre-show, and I did not appreciate that when you're coming out of the valley onto the bluffs, you're going to have climbs that last more than 45 seconds, 90 seconds. Although, have you ever done the St. Croix Trail out of Stillwater?
Yes,
Have you
so
gone,
pretty.
have you gone up the 8% incline around
Yeah,
Stillwater?
yeah. So the
Yeah.
great thing about the
Yeah.
recumbent trike is there is no so slow that you fall over.
That's a
And
great
so
point.
so if you get tired, I was in Itasca, and if you
Yeah.
bike Itasca, it's lovely, but it's very hilly. And I hit a grade where I was just like, I cannot, and I would get off and walk. But wait, I can just set my parking brake and sit here in a chair while I recover.
That is slick. That's
It's
slick.
like
I hadn't thought of that.
it's a little embarrassing, but whatever. I'm not here to impress people.
No, no. The first time I did that was last year, and I think my wife and I knew intellectually what we were getting into, but didn't realize what 8% for, I think it's three-quarters of a mile or something
It's
like
a
that
lot.
actually feels like. And, every time I watch the tour, or any of the major races, I'm thinking
And they're
those
like
guys would just be like,
15%.
what's the big deal here? It's 8%. What's wrong with you guys? It's like, well, I do weigh twice as much as you do. So there you go. As we said in the pre-show, we are descended from a different stock, right?
Yes. We survive winter well.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah, it's oh, that's funny. Is it just me? Are we better between chair and keyboard when we have healthy activities hobby? Yes, we do, Java Grunt. I agree with that
Yeah.
completely.
It
That's
turns out that the shiny box is not the only source of joy in our life.
no. Get outside. Get out in
Hmm.
it. Yeah, no, I agree. I always like to remind people that if you get into cycling, cycles have computers and you can geek out on all sorts of things on the bike.
So many stats. I just ordered a new fitness tracker. I ordered an Aura ring.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I a
I'm
friend of mine
excited to
had
see
one
how
of
it
those. I
goes.
don't know if he still uses it, but you'll have to give me the skinny when
Yeah.
you get it. What you think?
Gen 3 is supposed to do full-time heart rate monitoring and exercise. And I'm like, that'd be exciting. Because I have a complaint about all the exercise things ever. They do not count snow shoveling. Snow shoveling is hard work, and I need you to
Yeah,
count it.
yeah. See, on my Apple Watch, when I go shovel, I start a snow sport. is the way I've
Right.
decided to accomplish that fact. Because
But
yes,
I
you can
feel
burn
like it's
some serious
harder than,
calories.
say, cross country skiing, even.
Yeah, it can be. It can be. Especially in March when you get that heavy wet
Oh,
crap.
the heavy stuff. Yeah.
I don't like that. I don't like. That's the only nice thing about when it gets really cold is then it can't snow,
It's true.
or it doesn't snow. I guess maybe I shouldn't say can't.
No. Or it's very, very light, fluffy stuff.
Yeah, yeah. You can just like brush it off with a broom.
Yeah. Hurriedly because it's cold out there. But that's the problem with cycling in Minnesota. Everybody has a different set point. Like Joe
Hmm.
Laha has no bottom that I have found. He will
Sure.
bike in anything.
Hmm.
I don't go below 0 because I can't keep the fog on my goggles from freezing,
Hmm. Hmm.
and phone batteries really don't like it,
Hmm.
and I don't like being out without some way to contact people. So
Yeah, that's just smart.
below 0 I don't cycle, but I used to be a winter cycle commuter, and I'd come in from New Hope to downtown.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive because it's hard to cycle when there's. That's always what worries me about riding in less than great weather is what happens when I hit a patch of ice. What happens if I hit some slush? This is where again I really do need that fat tire. But
I
I
had
know my
studded
road bike would
tires.
never hit it. Oh, that's smart. That's like cheating.
I had a I had a summer bike and a winter bike, and
Of course,
the
of
winter
course.
bike was a Trek Soho, which sadly they've stopped making. It's my name for it is Bruiser. It had a heavy ass aluminum frame. It had a belt drive instead of a chain
Oh
drive. It
yeah,
had an internally geared hub so that nothing got
nice,
into it.
smart.
So all of the salt was a non-issue.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then I put studded tires on it. And I even did one year the what is the winter snowshoe people?
Oh,
The Lopit.
yes,
Lopit.
yes.
I did the Lopit. They have a winter lake bike ride.
Nice.
So like they clear off a frozen patch and you go around
Yeah.
on the lake as a race. I was very slow, but it was hilarious.
See, the speed thing, I've never, that's never bothered me because I am not a fast cyclist. There's no getting
Mhm.
around that. I will never even come close to challenging at anybody. I mean, I got a good friend that does a lot of cycling, and he and I rode once this summer, last summer, and he's like, well, what's your average pace? And he chose his bike based on that, right? So he brought a slower bike so that he wouldn't have
Yeah,
to, soft pedal
right.
the entire time. But I'm okay with that, right? Because it doesn't bother me when these, I see these people go blowing by me on the path all the time, clocking by at 22, and like, good for you, But
Mm-hmm.
because to your point, it's my ride, and what am I getting out of it? And now I do wish, interestingly enough, this was occurred to me when we were talking a bit about our industry. I wish cycling clothing was a little more body inclusive.
Right.
Because
I make my okay. Here's the most Minnesotan cyclist thing ever. I won a ribbon at the state fair for a cycling jersey I made myself
heck yeah, heck yeah,
because it was wool and also my
love it.
size.
Love it. Yeah, I there is nothing as ridiculous in my opinion as cycle clothing sizes. It's stunning to me.
It's bad for men. It is so much worse for women. Evidently, they feel
100%.
like body dimorphism is a 50-50 split.
Mm,
And like everybody
mm,
below this size is obviously a woman, and
right.
everybody above this size is a dude. And I'm like, that's not actually how body distribution works, but okay.
It,
So I
a
felt
couple companies are getting better. Like I've had some good luck with like Velocio particularly, and like Twin Six here in the cities makes decent, at least jerseys.
some,
I like their
yeah.
jerseys.
I
Uh,
go with Aerotech has plus size
yes.
women's
Mm.
cycling stuff.
Yeah, my wife has several other things as well. So I guess what kills me is there are like I feel this way about jeans, frankly. I would pay a shocking amount of money for a pair of jeans that were like cut for me for my body,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel the same way about cycling kit. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
not afraid to spend a few $100s on a pair of bib shorts. Just
Right.
give me what I'm
Just make
looking
them
for
my
here.
size.
Yeah, yeah, and it's where my wife runs into issues with jerseys. Like she can't
Oh
find
yeah.
jerseys, and I'm just like, this just kills me. That like there's one company where she has a couple of their bib shorts and they fit great, but she's like, your jerseys suck. Like you need
Right.
bigger cuts. Like what is the story here?
Yeah. I sew my own. I like
I
not a
mean
hundred
that is
percent,
a
but
solution to the problem. Yeah.
this is sewing has been a really interesting way for me to assert a lot of personality while I'm doing DevRel. So if
Sure.
you see me at a conference, and even right now, like I made this shirt, um, if you see me at a conference, you see me in clothes that I made myself. And that is for me a huge confidence boost because it is exactly what I want. It
Right.
fits me the way I want it to fit me. It has some fucking pockets. Um, for the mic pack, like when you're up on stage, they want to attach a mic to you. And if you're wearing like a sweater dress, you're kind of screwed. There's no place
Right.
to put it.
Right.
So I always make my clothes with pockets for the mic. And I find it really empowering to be able to say,
Yeah.
what are the parameters for what I want to have? And how do I make that happen? So my current cycling sewing project is a recumbent um, jersey because I don't
Awesome.
want pockets in my back.
Right.
My back
Right.
is up against a seat. I want pockets in the front, but they need to be angled so that
Sure.
nothing slips out of them.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. That it gets the colors you want, gets the cut you want, puts the pockets where you want them, the depth you want them. I mean, how many times have you done that? You try somebody, you're like, oh, these pockets are too short, like they're shallow, like I
Girl
can't even get
pockets
my
are the
phone in
worst.
there. Yeah, no, I that is one I've certainly heard from my wife on more than one occasion, and I do not, for the life of me, understand why people think women don't want pockets.
I
Um,
think they think we carry purses.
I guess, and I just saw an article, I think it was yesterday, that apparently the crossbody bags are becoming incredibly popular for men. That's
Okay.
becoming the new sneaker way of showing off your fashion is by having the crossbody bag slash and purse. I don't know, whatever
Yeah.
they want to call it, but
Be careful, friends, because asymmetrically loading your shoulders makes them angry.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think
That
I am
thing that
cool
your
enough to
mom
pull that
yelled
off.
at you in junior high about putting your backpack on with both straps,
Yeah,
I hesitate to report, but she is correct.
yeah, yeah. It's just like when you're dragging your rollerboard, you got to use both arms. It's a good
Mm-hmm.
way of pulling a shoulder muscle if you're not careful. Well, and maybe that's the key. I just need to start making my own cycling clothing, which I know I don't have the talent for that. I did figure out how to make bread, and
There
I,
you
I
go.
did I did actually
Was
make some
that your
pretty. Yeah,
pandemic
yeah.
project?
Basically, so when golf season ended, I guess in was it fall of 2020, I'm like, okay, well, I got to do something now to amuse myself, and so I started making bread, and this weekend's project was bagels, and it actually turned out
Ooh,
really well. So there's
excellent.
actually a very good flour mill not too far from where I live, a little north of me, Sunrise Flour Mill. I get most of my stuff from them because heritage wheat,
Mm-hmm.
so that makes me happy. But yeah, yeah, I'm here for the bread. I could never do the keto Carl kind of diet. That would not me.
Like, yeah, godsend. I do not have to do that.
No, 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 that would be the end of me. I'm here for my carbs. Thank you very much.
We have to survive this winter somehow.
Right, right. Yeah, I think see only about another what 15 weeks of winter. I think whatever the groundhog sees a shadow here in 2 weeks.
Do you remember April?
Oh God, don't get me started. You mean
Yeah.
like the April we got inches of snow, the end of April, and yeah,
Yeah. I
I
was
do remember
I
that.
was in
Hmm.
Nashville and I saw that storm system coming across and I called Delta up and I'm like, get me out now. You're about to declare a weather emergency. Get me out now. And I went to the airport and I landed and it had started snowing. And by the time I got home from the airport, there was 2 inches of snow. And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, that is one nice thing about us doing this job from home. I don't have to worry quite so much about, weather delays and commute issues and things of that nature. But still, I miss seeing my friends in person. That's why I started doing this because it gave me an excuse to hang out with people.
Yes.
Well, I can't believe we've prattled on now for almost an hour and a half, and I still haven't mentioned Ted Lasso, which I feel very sad about. So I'll have to interject my. I will actually be doing Neil Busing will be on the show. I want to say either in February or March. I can't remember. I scheduled around here somewhere, and Neil and I will be talking about season 2 of Ted Lasso because that's how that rolls. He and I have threatened actually to do a show just completely about Ted Lasso. Maybe we'll have to do that. I don't.
I think you should invite Emily Freeman too, who is also a big fan.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll have to reach out because I have that'll give me good motivation. I've been meaning to get her on here as well because I would love to. shoot the proverbial shit with her. I've sort of taken it on my anytime I see something interesting from her on Twitter, I try to reply with a GIF. I think that's the only appropriate, response
Yeah,
half the time.
at that kind of volume. Same with Ian. Like, just yeah, just a GIF.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's all about that. So, well, I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me, my friend. And Ted Lasso as tech dev team metaphors. Oh, believe me, we could have find a way to mutilate that metaphor.
Didn't
Just you
didn't
watch.
Maddie do that? Didn't he do that talk?
I'm sure someone has. If they haven't,
Yeah.
we'll get on board with that because that does seem like Ted Lasso as a narrative arc would make
Mhm.
sense in some way, shape, or form. I actually for Christmas, one of the things we got our son was a Believe poster from the show. So we haven't put it up yet, but it'll go somewhere in the house, I'm sure. But anyway, so there, Ted Lasso.
Yes.
I'm here
Any
for
other
it.
questions from our devoted audience?
Keeps me up at night. No, I think we've hit all that. Bike trails, Colorado, California, Minnesota. I can't speak to California as bike trails, but I 100% agree. Colorado's are amazing. My only complaint with Minnesota's bike trail system is they don't connect as well as I wish they could. Gateway's awesome. There's no way to get to the gateway without going on some crazy roads. And Gateway, the further west you go, the more it gets chopped up by neighborhoods and you're crossing roads every block and it sucks. But
Yeah.
yeah, we did two metrics last year. One we did basically around here. We did the trail knot that you mentioned earlier that goes from Hugo. Actually, goes
Hmm.
almost from White Bear, not quite White Bear, but Hugo really is where it starts. Every time I drive by that train line, I think,
So close.
wish
Come
you'd
on.
shut this train down and just run that trail all the way into White Bear, because then I can hop on Vento from there, and then I can get on Gateway from
Mhm.
there. And it's like that would be a fun ride. I don't really want to have to go over to Manning if I can avoid it. Thank you very much for asking. Um, yeah, I wish our trail system intersected better. The other one we did actually was at Tour de Saints. We tacked another 16 or
Hmm.
so, 15 on the end of that one. We did the 50
On the
there.
super hilly one, I'm impressed.
Yeah, well, but that trail is so amazing up there too, though.
It is.
So we did like 30 something the day before exploring the trail, which was more than we kind of intended to, which made itself known as we were doing the 50 the next day of, hey, maybe we shouldn't have done 30 yesterday before doing 65 today. That was maybe a strategic mistake.
Whatever. Whatever.
It's fine. It's fine. We'll do it live. But well, see, now I think you and I need to do some cycling this summer because every time I see someone on a recumbent, I think that looks really comfortable.
It's super comfortable. It's
As
so
as I'm
good.
perched on my not so comfortable saddle.
Yeah. I also I'm formulating a theory that there is a finite age at which you just need to not hold your shoulders and your head like that if you want to be able
Mm,
to move again.
yeah, yeah. There's some truth to that. It's my bike setup is decidedly not a slam stem with I'm not in a particularly compromised
Hmm.
position. My body would not be comfortable with that. So it's
No.
it's pretty upright. I'm more of a human sail than anything else, but I go downhill like a rock.
Yes, it's the best. This is the great thing about being a heavy cyclist.
Right? But see, that's the nice thing about that St. Croix loop in Stillwater is once you get up the 8% loop, it's downhill the entire way from there. You
Hmm.
basically just coast your way back into Stillwater. So, trade-offs, trade-offs.
Yeah. And then there's lots of nice restaurants in Stillwater. I like going into Stillwater.
Yeah, there's good places. There's Candyland too if you just need some candy. Yeah, there's
Hmm.
there's all sorts of good spots. Who knew this was going to devolve into Minnesota travel by bike?
Yes. We also recommend the Paul Bunyan Trail,
Yes,
although maybe
100%.
not right this minute.
No, no. That one is that 100 miles? I think it is because I think that goes all the way up to Bemidji, if I remember
Yeah.
right. That's a lot of trail. I'm blanking on the one in Collegeville. Lake Wobegon. That one's the Wobegon
Yeah,
Trail.
Lake
That
Wobegon.
that one also goes 60, 70 miles, some crazy thing like that. You can do some
Hmm.
pretty serious trail riding if you can get to said trail. But the other one I really enjoyed, and I'm also blanking on the name that comes out of Duluth,
Oh yeah.
and I can't believe I'm getting the name of it, but it is all uphill out of Duluth. So I recommend coming out of Duluth and then coming back into Duluth if you're just gonna do an out and back. It goes through like these granite canyons, and if I remember right, when Christina and I did it, you cross like two roads, and at least one of them is in a state park, and so it's a dirt road, and there's nothing around, and it is a very scenic ride, to say the least, and it's pretty straightforward. Other than the
That
fact that
sounds
it is
great.
uphill all the way out of Duluth.
Uphill all the way. Yeah. I really like the loose line out to, I forget what it is when it turns into limestone, but there's a nice one that just heads straight west, basically from Theo Worth.
Nice. Yeah, I haven't done the Greenway in a long time, but that's another trail
Mhm.
system we have here. We just need the snow to melt, and then we'll
No,
we'll get
I
out and.
mean, they clear the trails, to be
Oh,
fair.
that's fair. Fair. Yeah. I still need a fat tire bike. See, bikes are the perennial N-1 problem.
They
I always
are.
need one
Well,
more.
it depends on how tolerant your spouse is. Your spouse cycles with you, so you do
That helps.
have an
That helps.
advantage. Yeah.
See, I've always felt that the corollary to the N-1 problem is the S plus one, and so you have to make sure that you stay below the number at which your significant other will no longer be your significant other.
Right.
So there is a number of bikes at which point my wife will tolerate that. If I go above that number, then it's a different story. So as long as
Hmm.
I stay below that S plus one number, I'm good.
Yeah. I'm at four. Four.
That's not
We have
bad.
a we have a 3-car garage. It works out.
That's
And one of
perfect.
them is a mountain bike that I haven't taken out in forever because
That doesn't
uh
count.
yeah, I only mountain bike when we actually have emergency room capacity.
Yeah, that's smart. That's smart. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe hold off on that for another 6 to 36 months.
Yeah, right.
Oh my God. Well, clearly, Heidi, I could keep talking to you for another hour and a half, but I know it is a holiday for you, and I'm sure you have other things to do. So I appreciate hanging out with you, and I have been a delight to get to know my fellow Minnesotan in this crazy space, and thanks for hanging out with me. It was a good time.
Absolutely. And I will see you around.
Yes, you will. That is a guarantee, and we'll chat more about that in 30 seconds after I click this thing off. Next week, my main man Spencer Gibb will be hanging out with me. We had a show scheduled with him, and then he had a family thing come up, so we're gonna get him back on. So I'm looking forward to hanging out with Spencer. I believe Spencer was the last meal I had with somebody before the pandemic shut everything down. Pretty sure he and I had dinner together, and that was like the last one before the world shut down. So I miss my man Spencer. But anyway, well, thanks everybody, and we'll see you next week.